Welcome back everybody. Today we're going to do real minimum requirement to play Throne and Liberty. If you remember my video on the proposed minimum requirement to play Throne and Liberty, you remember that the devs are quite lazy. They just list Intel i5 6500, no AMD, 8GB of memory, and NVIDIA GeForce GTX 960, 4GB, 2GB, we don't know, no AMD, and no Intel GPU. So today we find out. Welcome to Respawn PC, I'm Dunk, let's game on. I'm going to start out with the lowest Intel GPU, which is the A310. If you watch my Throne and Liberty video on Arc GPU, you'll know that the A310 can play the game, but I was using the i7 8700, which is a way higher CPU than this one, which is i3 9100F, which is also the lowest CPU I have that I can use resizable bar, and which is also a requirement to use Intel Arc GPU. Now we're playing at 1080p, XeSS balance, and the lowest settings. With all those setups, we get an average of 74 FPS. It's quite playable, but we'll encounter a lot of stutter, as the i3 9100F have not enough core/thread to play this game. The CPU is pegged at 100% almost all the time, while the GPU, the A310, is hovering in the 70 to 80% of its position. The GPU is waiting for the CPU. The A310 is waiting for the CPU. Can you believe that? And what we need to do is just to step up the CPU. Now it's the i5 9600K. This is a 6-core 6-thread instead of the i3 9100F, which was a 4-core 4-thread. So this game, like I said in my past video of Throne and Liberty, is core/thread hungry. 4-core or 4-thread, 4-core/thread. If it's 4, the CPU will be a bottleneck. So we need at least a 6-core, 6-thread, 6-core/thread. Because right now, with the i5 9600K, the CPU usage is in the 60s to 80s. Still limits a bit, but at least the stutter is being reduced a lot. And the GPU is reaching the high 90s. Not exactly pegged at 100%, but the stutter is almost gone. And we seem to have now a memory bottleneck using 7.6, 7.7 out of 8. And that's the lowest we'll be able to go with the Arc GPU, as other platforms don't support resizable bar. I mean older one. Now I just wanted to test my theory of core/thread, how many you need. So from the i5 9600K, I dropped to the i7 920, our first gen i7, which is a 4-core 8-thread and only clock at 2.66 GHz, plus the boost at 3 point something. And I've paired it with a GTX 1050 Ti 4GB card, which is a similar performance as a GTX 960 4GB, and I was able to play at low settings FSR balance for over 60 FPS, 62 to be exact. And if you want to get a bit more quality visual, you can pop the settings to medium and still get around 42 FPS. The GPU is almost pegged at 100% and the CPU is wavering 60 to 70. It seems we are memory bottleneck again. So the i7 920 at 4-core 8-thread is a bit more performing than the i3 9100F, which is a 4-core 4-thread but at 3.6 GHz. So this game is not gigahertz hungry. It's a core/thread hungry, regardless of the age of your CPU. Another test I did is the GTX 1060, but the 3GB variant, because my GTX 960 and the GTX 1050 Ti, which both are 4GB VRAM card, they were almost pegged at the maximum VRAM memory, 3.6 and 3.8. So what happened if you use a 3GB card? Well, we still get 73 FPS at low settings FSR balance. So the game is not limited to the size of the VRAM. The CPU utilization is wavering between 50 to high 90s. So almost a bottleneck, but I think the real bottleneck again is the system memory. I'm surprised at how playable it is with this really old CPU. Dragging down now to the GTX 1050 non-Ti, so this is a 2GB GPU, still at 1080p, low settings, lowest settings, and FSR balance. But this time we have a hard time to reach 30 FPS. Our average is in the 20, like mid 25, 26 FPS to be exact. I think we reached the limit of the GPU, so 2GB card don't seem to pass. GPU is obviously peg, sometimes going down at 95, but I still consider that peg, but the VRAM is almost maxed out. I don't know why it's not at 2GB. Anyway, the CPU is hovering in the 50 to 70s, so CPU is still good. So really the GPU is at the maximum capacity to run this game. A 2GB card seems a no-go. And just because I took the card out, the GTX 950, another 2GB card, even worse supposedly than the GTX 1050, but I had a little bit better result than the GTX 1050. I had an average of 28 FPS, as long as you don't go in city. This is horrible. You go just below 20 in the high teens FPS. So a 2GB card is not an option. I won't even try the GTX 750 Ti because I know it won't go anywhere. Now, jumping on the AMD side of things, I start right away with the Ryzen 3 1200. This is a 4-core 4-thread to say I have the same result as Intel 4-core 4-thread. And we have this 4-core 4-thread is pegged at 100%, is struggling a lot, giving a lot of stutter and really unstable FPS. It vary from 56 to 24, giving an average of 40. So the GPU, RX 560 4GB variant, seem to be able to play the game at this resolution, but the CPU cannot keep up. Now switching the CPU to more core, more thread, the Ryzen 5 1500X. I don't have the Ryzen 5 1400, but they both 4-core 8-thread, and this make a huge difference. Now the CPU is hovering between 30 to 60% of its utilization, so it's really core/thread hungry. The GPU, our RX 560 4GB variant, is pegged at 99% with all the VRAM maxed out, 3.8, 3.9GB of VRAM. But now we have an average FPS of 52. Now this is highly playable. We are back at having the system memory being our bottleneck, using 7.6 out of 8, leaving some for Windows to run in the background. Dropping the GPU from the RX 560 4GB to the RX 550 4GB, because we know 2GB is a no-go. And even this 4GB RX 550 seems to be also a no-go. We get an average of 19 FPS. The VRAM is maxed out, the CPU usage is okay, and the GPU usage is maxed out also. That's our first 4GB card that cannot take the game. And finally, it will be the R9 380. This card is older than the RX series, but it should be more performing than the RX 550 or 560. At 1080p, low settings and FSR balance, we get an average of 53 FPS. And we have quite a gap between city and in the open world. In city, we get in the mid 44 FPS, and when you're out in the wild, you get 75 FPS. A huge difference between in city and in world. But I'm happy to see that really old CPU and really old GPU can run the game. So what's our winner for the real minimum requirement to play Throne and Liberty? For Intel side, i7 920 or anything that have 6 core or more. For the AMD, our Ryzen 5 1400 or Ryzen 5 1500X. Don't forget the i5 9600K, or you probably can even go down to the i5 8400, which is a 6 core if you have the Intel GPU Arc A310, as long as you have a 6 core or more and resizable bar for a Intel GPU. The GTX 960 4GB variant or the GTX 1050 Ti, which is a 4GB also, and for AMD, RX 560 4GB or the R9 380 4GB. All those cards will guarantee you to play over 30 FPS. You can even include the GTX 1060 3GB, and that is to play at 1080p, low settings, FSR balance for Throne and Liberty. Thanks to have come watching, and see you in the next one.